if you are the hopeful homeowner and feel like you're shut out of the market, the first step is education.
With a self-funding house, let's provide a journey that the home buyer doesn't have to go it alone. This is a different product with a different way of doing it. It's also a great way to tackle our housing crisis.
When we talk about the self-funding house, we look at what's going on in the world today, and really in the world, but let's just talk about Canada, and then we can even break it down provincially if we want. But the first-time home buyer has a whole story that they can't get into the housing market. There's no way to do it. They feel shut out. If they don't have wealthy boomer parents, there's no gifting of down payments. How do we do this? How do we make it all work? You and Derek Lobo wrote a book and then went on to write a couple more, The Self-Funding House, which is all to say, if you're a first-time home buyer and are trying to get into the housing market for the first time, there is a way. It's called The Self-Funding House. Rod, give us an overview of what the Self-Funding House is all about.
Absolutely. And, it was targeted for exactly the person you described, that first time home buyer. And then a large part of them, Patrick, they've excused themselves from the market. They've relegated themselves to thinking that I'm not even thinking about buying a house because it's not like mom and dad when they bought their house at 2 or 3 times their income. It's 10 to 15 times today. So I know my salary isn't going to be increasing to make up that difference. And I doubt housing prices are going to come down to likewise make up that difference. So Derek and I wrote that book, and we wanted to challenge and tackle the mindset of home buyers today, particularly in today's market, and specifically to think differently about home ownership by thinking of their home as a business by
Hmm.
becoming a landlord. And although not a new concept, I don't believe the mindset in the younger generations, and I know our staff and our children firsthand, don't have that thinking. They just excuse themselves and thinking they're not going to do it. But you know what? If all of a sudden you can do the simple thing, which is how do we increase the income of a home buyer? Because asking builders to reduce the cost, there just isn't that bandwidth. Construction costs and all those other elements, land costs, they're less controllable. But a person's income is perhaps a little more controllable if we can bolt on income for perhaps a rental suite, a backyard ADU, a basement apartment, and adding that to their income, giving them the buying power to buy a house in today's market.
Well, I love what you said around looking at your home and treating it like a business. That's a shift right away of mindset. Now, for a little additional context, I mean, you and I have literally educated, coached, worked with thousands of real estate investors. And what we know is that when that shift can occur, if we can support the hopeful home buyers in having a shift at looking at the property that they buy, to your point, as a business, as an investment, and start to shift that mindset, then we can see the opportunity. The reality of it is this, Rod, as you and I both know, it is very doable, but for most, it's an education factor. We're in the industry. We've watched thousands of real estate investors buy real estate, do a great job, follow a system. But if you're not in that game, if you're just that person that's working and hoping to buy a home one day, you don't necessarily understand what is possible because you're literally not in the industry. So from our perspective is this is totally doable if you are the hopeful home owner and feel like you're shut out of the market. The first step is education and that shift of mindset saying it is possible. One other, and I'm just going to go off on just one other little tangent. We use the term landlord, and many years ago within the real estate investment network, we started to use the term rental housing provider. And that term it's taken a long time, but I'm starting to hear more and more people using the term rental housing provider. And part of that is that it doesn't have such a negative connotation to it as being a landlord. And of course, that's what scares people who are uneducated. I don't want to be a landlord, tenants and toilets. I don't want anything to do with it. But the reality of it is that when you're educated, it isn't like that. So we can expand on that a little bit more, but I wanted to give it another layer of depth of context. So when you talk about treating it like a business, Rod, why don't we unpack that a little bit for somebody who's looking at it going, okay, you've got my attention. how would I treat it like a business? What does that even mean?
Yeah, and you know what? That's the golden question. If we think about it, if everybody had the entrepreneurial mindset and always had a willingness to learn, you and I wouldn't be talking about this. But the
Hmm.
reality is, we have to understand and really take responsibility for providing a hand-holding journey, if you will, for that uneducated buyer. Remember, let alone uneducated buyer, uneducated in this new method of buying a self-funding house. So we're adding even deeper layers of the unknown. And so I would say
Hmm.
the very first thing is just being that willing student. I often coin the phrase the first level of leadership in anything, life, business, whatever it is. But the first level of leadership is just being a willing student. And if we
Hmm.
can realize that if we can provide education like what REIN does, then that is the first positive step, because they have to be educated on, first of all, the industry, home buying and everything associated with that. They have to be educated. Oh, what does it mean to own a business? Was that
Hmm.
because there's positives to that, tax advantages and things like that, that maybe the layperson isn't fully aware of. And so I think that it's one thing to have an idea, but what I'm taking pride in and what we're doing with the self-funding house and working with collaborators like yourself and Rain is realizing that let's provide a journey that the home buyer doesn't have to go it alone. And
Hmm.
more importantly, it isn't just the buyer we're talking about. We have to change the thinking of financial institutions. We have to change the thinking of developers and builders, because this is a different product with a different way of doing it. And it's also a great way to tackle our housing crisis.